Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello, welcome to The People's View. Co-hosts Representative Carl Seidel and Representative Pete Silva, and our guest today, Chris Williams from the Nashua Chamber of Commerce. Remember that this show is sponsored by the Nashua Republican City Committee, and you can look up our events that are held on the second Thursday of every month, and our website is nashuagop.org. Well, welcome, Chris. Thank you for coming. I'd like to have you in here and hear about the Chamber of Commerce and what they're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
We'd like to start off with the railroad situation.
Yes,
and maybe you can tell us how you feel about what happened.
Can I get my violin out?
We'll see. You didn't have the tissues here.
Right, absolutely. Unfortunately, the effort to really figure out if rail is indeed a good thing or not really took a hit here very recently with the Executive Council voting against moving forward with the two federal studies that we were hoping would be conducted. And you both are extremely familiar with this issue, forward and backward, and I know we each actually have different perspectives on this rail issue, but I think all of us agree that this study, the two federal studies, could have given us the answers once and for all on whether or not we should move forward with a rail initiative. And we were really looking forward to having that study conducted and completed so that we could sit back down and say, does this make sense or not? So certainly the business community is extremely disappointed that our own local executive councilor, David Wheeler, voted against letting those studies move forward. And when you look at his district, and certainly Nashua is a major part of that district, the popular opinion is overwhelmingly in favor of at least looking at the issue and seeing if it makes sense. So for him to cast the vote he did, we felt really was a disappointment, not just to the business community, but even to his constituents in general.
We've read things in the paper, especially the thing that interested me is that there might be a way of getting some kind of funding to look at it just up to Nashua, and if it could be a interstate thing, which would be approaching it a little bit differently, and maybe the federal government has less restrictions or less requirements for funding.
Yeah, here, for the sake of the viewers who might be watching, I'll kind of give you a little bit of a snapshot in terms of what we had hoped would happen and then what could still happen. What we had hoped would happen was that the Executive Council would approve two different federal studies, one conducted by the Federal Transit Authority, the other one by the Federal Rail Authority. The two studies combined would have looked at the feasibility of rail and other forms of transportation between Nashua all the way up to Concord. Those are the two studies that the Executive Council voted against. And that was roughly $3.6 million in federal funds that they declined. What could still happen is that we could allow one of those two studies to still move forward. I mentioned there was the Federal Transit Authority and the Federal Rail Authority. The one that we are hoping could still move forward is the Federal Transit Authority. And that portion of the study is roughly $1.9 million versus the original 3.6. That $1.9 million would look specifically at the feasibility of rail and still also look at other modes of transportation between Nashua and Manchester. So Plan B would limit the scope. So it's no longer from Nashua all the way up to Concord. Instead, it would be Nashua to Manchester. And it would also be a limited financial amount in terms of $1.9 million versus that original $3.6 million. The trick to that, in order for that to still happen, is that the Executive Council would have to vote on that refined study. So we would have to hope that either Executive Councilor Wheeler or one of his other two colleagues who voted with him against the original studies, one of them would have to change their mind and say, now that you have refined this and scoped it back, now maybe I can support that. We don't know if that's going to happen. We're in conversations behind the scenes with the councilors, the three that voted against it, hoping that one of them will reassess this situation. It would be great if our own local councilor would open his eyes a little bit more to the wishes of his constituents and allow that limited scope study to move forward. But unfortunately, as we sit here, I can't tell you which way we're going to go with that or which way he's going to go.
It's funny because of all the votes that I've made in Concord, however many that is, that we've had in the 2 terms I've been there, this one was the most telling of actually doing what you said you're supposed to do and vote with your constituents. As you know, I'm not a fan of it.
Right.
When I campaigned initially, my first term was a huge thing. Yep. And then once I got up there and I found out the feasibility and the money and everything, but I'm supposed to represent my constituents, and so I voted, you know, for the study. Yep. But explain, when we say $1.9 million, what's the catch to New Hampshire for that?
Certainly, yep. The matching for the federal grant. So you've got $1.9 million from the federal authority that would come in and give us that 1.9. In order to get that 1.9, we would have to put up $400,000 in matching.
1.9 is 400,000.
Yeah,
I thought the whole thing was 400.
The whole thing was 400 for both studies
Right.
together. My understanding is that even that limited study would still require the 400,000. Okay. That's my understanding. I might be somewhat off base.
It's usually
that.
10% or something, I think, for some of those studies.
Somewhere,
but anyway,
yeah. Either way, we're going to have to put up
$100,000.
Exactly. You're looking at somewhere between $200,000 and $4,000 that the state would need to put up in matching grants. What our message has been to the council is that that $400,000 can be covered in what is known as toll credits. And not to get into the weeds too much with your viewers here, but suffice it to say that toll credits are a way for the state to be able to put up matching funds without it being real dollars. And I use that term very loosely because certainly if you wanted to get into the weeds, you could talk about how real dollars
just
are
one point of clarification,
for,
because that means that we can't use that money for something else.
Absolutely does. You're right. My response to that would be is that we do have a tremendous amount of toll credits here in the state that can be allocated to anything, and to take $400,000 or less out of that big bucket of toll credits is a drop in the bucket compared to how much really is in there that could be allocated to other projects. Now,
I won't get into
exactly.
that. I have to be on the Public Works Committee, and that's a big argument there. Yes. But I understand. I didn't understand that that part was still available. I thought what I read in the paper was that there was something between Massachusetts and Nashua to extend the line up to like Pheasant Lane and take care of both Massachusetts and New Hampshire commuters.
I think what you're referring to is an effort that the mayor here in Nashua has really been spearheading pretty quietly, independently of all of this other discussion happening in Concord. So what you have are 2 different tracks, no pun intended. The first track being everything that we're talking about with the studies for getting it up through Nashua to Manchester and to Concord. Parallel to that, but independent, is a smaller scope, a smaller effort that the mayor has been making some good but quiet progress on, that is in partnership with the MBTA and the town of Tingsboro. The idea behind that parallel track is to get the rail in Lowell to simply extend up to Tingsboro, right at the parking lot where the Pheasant Lane Mall is located. Many of your viewers may already know that the parking lot for the Pheasant Lane Mall straddles both sides of the state line. So there is the opportunity there for us to get the rail up to Tingsboro right in that parking lot area and allow it to service both Massachusetts and the Nashua side of the state line. That continues to move forward. Again, it's a quiet effort. And I think the mayor is making some good progress on that. We'll certainly continue to cheer on that project, because at the end of the day, that will allow us to still get rail to at least Nashua.
Well, I think you're right, but the rails really, I mean, you're looking now not only as passengers, but freight.
Yes.
And those rails that are in there, especially the ones that go through the center of Nashua, really need reconditioning. Replacement is a better word, maybe.
Yes, yes. They would have to be completely replaced and upgraded with new tracks that could serve both passenger and freight traffic. You know, I'm glad you mentioned the freight issue, because that is something I think a lot of people don't necessarily consider. The economic impacts that freight traffic brings to New Hampshire. Put aside the whole question of passenger issues, you know, for a second, and just look at what freight does. It is responsible for thousands of jobs, but in turn responsible for tens of millions of dollars of business that is done that relies upon the ability to move freight up and down the tracks here in New Hampshire. And a side benefit to upgrading the tracks for passenger rail is that it would also improve the ability to move freight up and down those tracks. And we're going to need to fix the tracks or upgrade them at some point anyway in the future, because just like anything else, they're going to get worn out. They already are in some areas. And if we're going to have to upgrade them anyway, perhaps it could make sense to upgrade them to the level.
You don't want any more coal in the streets of Nashua?
Certainly not. No, no. We've had our share of minor incidents.
Have you had any dealings with the owners of those tracks? Because they haven't done very much to keep them up themselves.
Yeah, our Chamber of Commerce hasn't directly interacted with the ownership of the tracks in quite some time. Now, there certainly are other entities that are better positioned to do that. You know, New Hampshire DOT. Certainly our own mayor's office here and city leadership are in more regular contact with the ownership than where we are at the chamber. And that's simply because they're in the position where they need to be interacting directly with the ownership, where we're interacting more with you, with the rest of the legislative leadership.
People who might be using the service.
Absolutely.
So
exactly.
is that what the study does, is to figure out the feasibility? Like, do we know, would BAE benefit from the rail, both in freight and commuter? I mean, what does the study do exactly? I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, the entire study that we had hoped would get passed would have looked at several different things related to doing rail between Nashua all the way up to Concord. It would have looked at the cost of actually putting it into place, the cost of operating it in the long-term future. It would have looked at the economic impacts that it could have had along those track lines. It would have looked at the environmental impacts. And then it would have also looked at, what about expanding the bus service? What about other forms of mass transit that could be looked at? And how do the benefits and costs of those forms of transit compare to the benefits and costs of the rail itself? So it really was an all-encompassing study that would have answered many questions, and not just the cost itself, but what would be the economic benefits, who would use it, could we expect in terms of ridership numbers, what could we expect in terms of the freight impact. It would have answered all of those. The more limited Plan B scope that we're now looking at isn't quite going to answer all of those, but it's still going to answer the more critical questions, namely being the cost of the rail line for the actual installation, and then what's the sustainability of it, operational costs going forward, and to a limited scope, what are some of those economic impacts that it could have. It won't go quite as far as the original two studies together would have done, but it's better than where we are now.
Are there any operational options, I guess you might say? You know, as far as I've heard this high-speed rail, which in my mind doesn't make sense going from here to Concord, but is there a limitation on the speed on those rails? I mean, that's going to determine the cost of replacing what you have.
Sure. My understanding is that the limits on the physical operation of the rails would be very much in line with what's already in place in Massachusetts.
Okay.
So consider the train
the standard.
Exactly. Consider the train that comes up to Lowell.
50 or 60 miles an hour.
Exactly. The study would be looking at within those parameters rather than high-speed rail. I share your opinion. You know, high-speed rail isn't necessarily something that's going to be conducive to this area.
And moving it with the buses, I think, might be good to bring people into, because you only have 1 or 2 stops here in New Hampshire, and you got all these people that are going to be trying to drive in there. If you have a bus for the people who don't drive, that might help out.
I would hope, that whether or not we get the rail line to just Pheasant Lane Mall or beyond, whatever the stop ends up looking like, should we get a stop, is that it will be a multimodal transit hub of some sort. And certainly the Manchester-Boston Regional Airport, just north of us, is keenly interested in having that sort of a multimodal hub right there at the airport itself. You look at what's happening at T.F. Green Airport down in Rhode Island right now. They're about to start eating our lunch up here with our own airport, and that's because they're very actively pursuing rail lines between Boston and the airport itself. And that's going to become a huge, huge factor for the economic survival of our own airport up here in the Manchester area. Not a year from now, but certainly 5, 10 years from now, we're going to really start to worry about the impact that progress of T.F. Green Airport is having on our own airport here.
There's a lot of people that go to Baltimore when they want to go to Washington because of a nice rail connection.
Absolutely.
At the airport.
I do it many times. When I fly to Washington, I go into Baltimore, I take the train in because I can save, a nice amount of cash doing that versus flying into Reagan International.
Very good.
So what are some of the other things? I know we just did the courthouse, and some people know about it, some people don't. But that was strange how they would even try to take that from us.
Yeah, some of your viewers probably know this issue pretty well. For those who don't, there was an effort initiated by the Chief Justice of the New Hampshire Supreme Court and the court system, who happens to be a Nashua woman herself, Linda Delanis, and she was tasked with trying to save some money, and so her intentions were certainly where we think they should be. Anytime the state is trying to save money, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Businesses do the same thing. We're always looking to try and streamline that bottom line and really maximize the services that we're offering with good savings on the expense side. So we applaud her for what she was trying to do. Now, the tactics that she pursued, trying to actually relocate the Nashua Superior Court up to Manchester, certainly we disagreed with that. It was a little bit of cutting off your nose to spite your face, in the sense that she was hoping to save a few dollars, but the impact that could have was tremendously larger than the savings that would have been realized by the court system itself. So the business community squarely got behind efforts to oppose that effort by Chief Justice Delanis. The legal community, the mayor's office, police and legal or law enforcement agencies from all across the greater Nashua area all came together, and we had tremendous support from our own local legislative leadership. I want to thank both of you for taking a strong leadership role in that, along with our two senators, Gary Lambert and Jim Luther, Dave Campbell, certainly a good colleague of yours from the other side of the aisle. It was a nice bipartisan effort here on behalf of our elected leadership, but it was also a great opportunity to watch all these different stakeholders in the greater Nashua community line up just shoulder to shoulder to shoulder, and say, this is bad for greater Nashua. We can't let this happen. And we're very much appreciative that our legislators outside of the greater Nashua area listened to that and agreed with our argument. And thanks to your help, not just on the committee itself, but in the House in general, about a week ago, we were able to put the final nail in the coffin on that effort. And I was very happy to see Justice Delanis publicly state that she's not looking to resurrect this idea again. She gave it a good run. Clearly, the legislature spoke, the local business community and the greater Nashua community spoke together, and I think she realized that she'll want to look elsewhere, I think, in terms of trying to...
Well, I think she can actually save that money still, but keep the things separate, like we said.
Yeah.
And if people want to see our last interview with the Chief Justice, they might have seen, they might hear what we suggested.
Well, and to, what I'll also say is that, again, we do applaud Justice Delanis for trying to save money.
She has some good ideas.
Absolutely.
Some very good
and I think that even though this effort wasn't successful from her perspective, she did, I think, win a lot of support in the legislature for trying to find other ways to help make sure our court system is well funded. And certainly the greater Nashua community, got to open its eyes a little bit to the struggles that she has on a daily basis trying to maintain a good system while at the same time keeping the expenses as low as possible. So I don't envy the position she's in whatsoever, but we're happy to put that issue behind us and move on to other.
What are you going to talk about? We're having a little legislative soiree with you, with the chamber next week?
Yes, next Monday.
Yeah.
So by the time this shows, it'll be March 26th is the date for the annual crossover legislative reception that our chamber hosts. We do this every spring. For those viewers out there who aren't quite as familiar with the legislative process as you guys are, you know that basically between January and June, that's when the legislature is in session. At about halfway, sometime in late March, early April, all of the bills that started in the House have to cross over to the Senate and vice versa. So it's kind of a halftime show, basically. And we host this reception as an opportunity to allow our business leaders in the area to mix and mingle with our elected leaders and all of us. It's a check-in point where we're able to hear from you what you see happening in Concord and get feedback from us on what we're hoping will happen up in Concord for the second half of the legislative session. And we always have a great turnout from our state legislators in the area. It's not just Nashua legislators, but even those outside of Nashua from Amherst and Merrimack, Hudson. We invite everyone in. Our state senators are invited. Executive Councilor Wheeler is certainly invited to attend this as well, as he always is. So it's a great opportunity for our local elected leadership to come together and have a touch point with the business leadership. We have a little bit of a unique angle this year. For those who regularly read thelobbynh.com, that's a political website that's facilitated and hosted by the Telegraph, our local newspaper. And we're going to have a few individuals who run that website come in to visit with us at the reception on March 26th. But for anyone out there, this is an open event. You don't have to just be an elected official. You don't just have to be a chamber member. We do allow others to come in as well if they want to attend the event and sit in on it. We're happy to have them there. It's March 26th, 5:30 to 7:30 at the Crown Plaza Hotel, and they can go on to NashuaChamber.com to get all the registration details for that program.
Okay, very good. You can maybe tell us also about your Business Insider Breakfast, too.
Yes, I'm very excited about this breakfast series. Anyone who is familiar with the Chamber knows already that we put on 45-plus events throughout the year. Some of them are more social in nature and networking in nature. Others are more educational in nature. This particular breakfast series fits squarely within the umbrella of being educational. It's called the Citizens Bank Business Insiders Breakfast Series. It's a three-part breakfast series that we're launching on March 29th, and then we'll have another one on April 19th, and then the final breakfast will be on May 24th. All three of these breakfasts are looking at the future of Nashua in terms of its ability to attract workers and be able to attract companies and businesses to the area in the long term. So I'm talking 10, 15, 20 years out. This three-part breakfast series is going to look at those questions and figure out, are we on the right track? What could we be doing more of? What might we be doing less of in order to make sure that we are on a good trajectory in terms of setting up Nashua as a competitive city here in northern New England for attracting the workers and the companies that we need to allow Nashua to continue to grow. What's unique and exciting about this breakfast series is that we're partnering with the Federal Reserve Bank down in Boston. They have a research arm of the bank called the New England Public Policy Center. And this organization is very much like a think tank, and they have senior economists and analysts who are very good at what they do, who have agreed to come in as part of this breakfast series and deliver presentations that they have already completed that can be related to Nashua's future economic development. So we have the director of the New England Public Policy Center herself coming in for one of these breakfasts. We have two of her senior economists coming in for the other two breakfast events. And as they come in, they'll be given their presentations at each of these morning events, and then we'll have local panels put together of New Hampshire people who will react to the presentations that have been given. And then the audience itself will have an opportunity through a Q&A session to have dialogue with the presenters and with the panels also. The very first breakfast, we'll be looking at the government structure here in New Hampshire as it relates to spending and revenue raising. Everyone knows where, live free or die, we have no sales or income tax. Well, what does that mean for New Hampshire when you compare the way we raise revenue and spend it and the limitations that it puts on us and the opportunities that it gives us? How does it stack up for New Hampshire versus our other neighbors here in New England? So we're going to be looking at that question. And then we have Mayor Lozo is going to be on the panel reacting to the presentation by sharing with the audience how New Hampshire's tax structure sets certain parameters for her in terms of trying to make sure the city budget is in good shape and that the city is providing the services that it needs to, that businesses want to have. We also have Senator Chuck Morse, who is the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. He's one of the main guys in Concord who is responsible for determining how the state is going to spend its budget. And so he's going to be on the panel as well. Good. And then finally, we have Mr. Steve Norton, who is the executive director of a New Hampshire-based think tank, who will also give his reaction to that presentation.
Is that the one at UNH?
Actually, Steve is with the New Hampshire Center for Public Policy.
Oh, okay.
Yep, and he's a pretty well-known individual within a lot of private sector circles here, and so he's going to be rounding out the third person on that panel for March 29th. And that, again, much like our legislative reception on March 26th, that event is open for any viewers out there who wish to come in. They can have breakfast with us. That'll be March 29th, starting at 7:30 a.m. at the Courtyard Marriott Hotel.
Slight charge for it.
There is, yeah. We do provide the breakfast, so anyone who wants to come, they can go onto our website. The registration information is there. I think it's $15 or so to help cover the cost.
$15 if you go to all three.
Or go all three.
The one.
Exactly. You can get a discounted price if you want to do all three. So you can come in, have a hot breakfast with us, get to meet a lot of your local officials and business leaders.
I think it's well worth it.
I think so too. And we've got a pretty large RSVP already for the event. So we're pretty excited to get that breakfast series going.
Good, good. Well, is anything else? We have a few minutes left in our little interview here. Do you have anything else you'd like to mention to our audience and what you're doing? You're recruiting members?
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit if I can, maybe 2 or 3 minutes.
Go ahead.
Okay, just stop me when I'm going over time. I'm real excited about a special branding initiative that the Chamber is undertaking this year in partnership with the city. About 1.5 years ago, the mayor and I sat down together with our economic development director, Tom Galligani. The three of us sat down around a table much like this and asked ourselves, what could the Chamber and the city be doing more of collaboratively to really set Nashua apart in terms of our business recruiting? And the question was really born out of an observation that I had a few years ago when I first took this job. What I observed was that the Chamber was out there kind of independently doing its business recruiting, talking to companies, trying to get them to expand or relocate to Nashua. And we would have certain things that we would say about how great it is to do business in Nashua. Parallel to that, the city would be out there doing its thing, talking to companies, sometimes the same ones, sometimes different ones. And it would also be talking about all the good things that Nashua has to offer in terms of doing business. What I saw was that we were both saying different things. Neither of us were saying inaccurate things. We just weren't saying the same thing.
Focusing on different things.
Absolutely. And we also were talking to different companies. And we're too small of a community for us to not be on the same page with each other. And you look at the global economy in which we live and operate today, you have to have your act together because we're no longer just competing against Lowell and Worcester and other cities in New Hampshire. We're competing against cities in the Midwest, on the West Coast, and internationally. And when people are looking at coming to your city, they're not even talking to you directly anymore. They're looking at your websites, they're looking at your social media presence. And with that in mind, we quickly, the three of us, agreed that we need to come together, collaborate on a campaign that's going to allow Nashua to actually have a business brand, complete with a logo, tagline, marketing collateral, and 2 new websites. So we all agreed that this was going to be a campaign that we would undertake together. And we're just starting that campaign. It's going to be a very quiet effort for a few months, and then it's going to take on a more public role. But we raised over $100,000 for this campaign. The city put in some seed money to show that it was committed to it. And then the chamber went out and raised the other half of the money. So we raised about $110,000 with just under $50,000 from the city and then roughly $60,000 from the private sector. So we went out and got companies, hospitals, banks, law firms, utilities to commit to the program and say, yes, we believe in what this is all about. We think this is a good idea, and they put real dollars into it. So we used that $110,000 to hire 2 agencies. One of them is from Tennessee, and they are a company that specializes in working with municipalities to look at their brand and look at how they present themselves vis-a-vis their competitors. So it's a great company that exists with that sole purpose, and they were a great agency for us to bring in. The second is a local agency, a Nashua-based marketing agency, and they're going to come in phase 2, and they're going to execute everything that that first agency does. So between now and the summer, the first agency from Tennessee is going to be doing focus groups, surveys, competitive analyses, a lot of one-on-one interviews with key people here in the Nashua community. And out of all of that homework is going to come the concept for what this campaign, what this brand, and what the 2 new websites should look like. Phase 2, the local agency will then come in. They're going to take all of that homework, they're going to take those concepts, and they're going to actually execute them and put them into place. The idea is that come this November, the city is going to have a brand new business destination website. So when you go to nashuanh.gov, you'll see a blurb there that says something to the effect of, are you looking to do business in Nashua? Click here. And that'll take you to this standalone, independent business destination website that's going to have very concise messaging and a new brand and look for promoting the city of Nashua in terms of a business destination. The second website is going to be a brand new, overhauled chamber website. So the chamber is going to have a separate website that is all about doing business in Nashua from a private sector perspective, not necessarily from a municipal perspective. But the catch is going to be that the chamber website and the business destination website are going to have a lot of synchronicity going on there, a lot of common elements and messaging. So you're really going to get a unified message, which I'm really excited about. And the added benefit to this is that we're also going to be reaching out to private companies, not just organizations like the city and the chamber, but to companies themselves and getting them to invest in this branding effort. So if you go to lawwarehouses.com or you go to persianruggallery.com, local businesses right here in Nashua, even on their home pages, you're going to see messaging about why they chose to do business here in Nashua that is in sync with what the chamber is saying and what the city is saying. So it's an ambitious undertaking.
You're going to have to come back and tell us how it works out.
I can't wait to do it.
We're officially running out of time, but this is something good.
Absolutely.
And, I think that we will have you back.
I look forward to it. Over the summer might be a good checking point for me to come in and give you an update on where things are.
Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for listening in, audience. And if you have any suggestions, just contact NashuaGOP.org and just set for the People's View, and we'll try to get to answer your questions. Thank you for listening.
Take care. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you guys very much. Much appreciated.
Good.